welcome viewers. I'm Pia and you're watching the China Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the headlines this hour. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has urged the United States to meet halfway during a phone call with Secretary of State Marco Rubio of the US, emphasizing that Xi-Trump relations are vital to global stability. The discussion comes ahead of a possible Trump-Xi meeting at the APEC Summit in South Korea. Meanwhile, the Taiwanese Foreign Minister Lin Chia-lung has stated that he is not worried about being abandoned by the US President during his meeting with China's Xi Jinping at the APEC Summit in South Korea. Lin has stated that Taiwan-US ties remain strong across security, trade and diplomacy despite rising pressure from the Chinese. China and ASEAN have signed the upgraded ASEAN-China Free Trade Area 3.0 agreement in Kuala Lumpur, expanding cooperation in digital, green and tech sectors. The pact aims to boost supply chains and market access as both sides face new US tariff pressures under President Trump. US President Donald Trump met Japan's new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi in Tokyo for talks on trade, security and critical minerals. Both sides have pledged to strengthen supply chains, address unfair trade practices and boost cooperation in order to secure rare earth markets. Russian President Vladimir Putin has met North Korean Foreign Minister Cho Sun-hui in Moscow to strengthen bilateral cooperation. Cho and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov have also held strategic talks, agreeing on all points and pledging mutual support on security, sovereignty and the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has suspended an energy pact with Trinidad and Tobago after US warship USS gravely docked there. Maduro accused Prime Minister Kamala Persad Bisesar of aiding Washington's agenda while she rejected what she called Venezuelan blackmail, vying to continue cooperation with US forces. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has signed an $11 billion deal with Turkey to sell 20 Eurofighter jets over 10 years after talks with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara. The agreement strengthens NATO's security and creates 20,000 jobs in the UK, though the visit was overshadowed by a Turkish espionage scandal. Magnitude 6.1 earthquake struck western Turkey's Balıkesir province late Monday, causing previously damaged buildings to collapse. Authorities reported 22 minor injuries from panic-related falls with no fatalities so far. Emergency shelters were opened as residents stayed outdoors amid aftershocks and rain. Alright viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has stated that Beijing hopes the United States will meet it halfway in order to stabilize ties and prepare for more high-level engagements. In a phone call with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Wang Yi has emphasized that the relationship between the world's two largest economies shapes global stability and remains crucial to international expectations. Wang Yi has praised what he's called the long-standing exchanges and mutual respect between President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, describing their relationship as a valuable strategic asset in bilateral ties. Amid renewed trade frictions over rare earths and US port fees on Chinese vessels, Wang Yi has stated that the recent economic talks in Kuala Lumpur has clarified positions, improved understanding and produced a framework consensus on key issues including soybeans and TikTok. He further stressed that progress requires both countries to resolve differences through dialogue rather than applying pressure. This, of course, comes ahead of an expected Xi-Trump meeting on the sidelines of the APEC CEO Summit in South Korea later this week. Rubio, meanwhile, has agreed that the US-China relationship is the most consequential bilateral partnership in the world. This is according to a readout that has been put out by the US Secretary of State's office. He has also stated that Washington aims to send positive signals through high-level diplomacy. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Andrew K.P. Leung. He's a strategist focusing on the Chinese economy and policy making, joining us from Hong Kong. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. We've been seeing this so-called back and forth going on between the United States and China, especially now in Trump's second term. Tariffs have been a key concern. Rare earth minerals, another point of contention that has come out. But in the midst of all of this, diplomatic talks continue. We've seen a conversation between Wang Yi and Marco Rubio as well. What do you think is then needed for both of these countries, the world's two largest economies, to come together and sort out their differences?
Well, what we are seeing is not just trade talks or negotiations. It's no less than a existential and historical contest between the two great powers, vying for relative influence and dominance. The United States sees China as an existential threat, as a bipartisan consensus, and then using all tools in its arsenal to thwart China's rise, whether it be on semiconductors, on trade, tariffs, allies, military encirclement in the South China Sea, Americans' allies in with Australia, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, and so on. But the Trump administration is finding it all these tools are increasingly less effective against a more confident China, which has found a very powerful stranglehold over Americans' Achilles heel, which is, of course, China's dominance and mastery of the rare earth supply value chain. And it's now weaponizing that, it's consolidating that. And of course, that the one of President Trump's vulnerable points is dependence on China's buying or purchase of soybeans from the Midwest states, which are President Trump's main supporters. And then with the midterm elections coming up, he's very, very eager to restore this purchase, because after all, China has been the largest buyer of American soybeans. So you can see that a balance of the tussle. It seems the scale is increasingly tilting towards Beijing's advantage. And of course, Beijing doesn't want to have a war, doesn't want to replace the United States. All China wants is a peaceful environment for it to grow this economy. But anyway, if both sides push the envelope too far, it could degenerate into a mutually destructive kind of confrontation. Hence, the play of China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi.
Indeed, absolutely. You know, you pointed towards the soybeans. In fact, that is a key concern because, as you said, Trump's majority of his voter base is in the Midwest. But meanwhile, China has now set its sights on Argentina in particular to source its soybeans. But apart from this, TikTok has been yet another concern that the Trump administration has been raising for quite a while now. Though there is a preliminary deal, a preliminary sort of agreement that has been drafted out for now that requires formal approval, there are further concerns that lawmakers within the United States are raising as far as the algorithm of TikTok is concerned as well. Do you think this could emerge as a further sticking point?
Well, I don't think so, really, because the TikTok deal is almost signed and seal and deliver. And what has been agreed is to create a separate algorithms where the data and the privacy or even national security data are in the hands of American companies controlled by the White House. So I don't think that that's going to be a sticking point. But the main TikTok shareholders, ByteDance, of course, retains its own logarithms, and that would be the TikTok around the rest of the world. But that's got very little to do with what's happening inside the United States.
And my last question, as far as this particular theme is concerned, what are your expectations from the Trump-Xi meeting that we're expecting later this week?
I think the Trump-Xi meeting is going to be at least a reset of a temporary pause of um, escalating confrontations, which would, of course, be mutually destructive to the United States and China. And nobody is going to have a decisive win. But then, of course, the Trump administration, as I pointed out earlier, is discovering more and more that China possesses a great deal of resilience and a great deal of countermeasures that could hurt American badly. So I think that both sides would like to have a pause and to reset relationships. And meanwhile, the Trump administration is trying to reap the best possible benefits out of the tour, signing deals with the Asian countries, and also doubling down on Americans' alliance with Japan and South Korea and so on. But I don't think that the rivalry between the United States and China is going to be resolved at one single meeting. And the rivalry will continue because both countries are great powers. And I don't think that the United States is willing to concede too much of its dominance in the world. And there are of course, advisors and hawks in the Trump administration who still believe that they can win over China. But I think that this is increasingly proving to be a pipe dream.
All right, so requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking some other very crucial information. Viewers, we're now learning that Taiwan's Foreign Minister Lin Chia-lung has now stated that he is not worried that US President Donald Trump will abandon the island during his upcoming meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea later this week. The meeting between Trump and Xi is expected to take place on the sidelines of the APEC Summit. Officials in Taipei have long feared that Taiwan's interests could be compromised during such high-level talks. However, their foreign minister has now come out and stated that Taiwan's relations with the United States will remain stable and that cooperation will continue closely in security, trade, and other areas as well. Although Washington does not have formal diplomatic ties with Taipei, it is legally required to provide defensive support to the island under the Taiwan Relations Act. Meanwhile, since taking office earlier this year, US President Trump has shifted his position several times on China and its claims over Taiwan. He had earlier stated that Chinese President Xi Jinping should not attempt any military action while he remains in office. Of course, it is also important to note that US has not approved any new arms sales for Taiwan yet. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Andrew K.P. Leung. Thank you so much for staying on. Of course, we're tracking Taiwan's concerns as far as the Trump-Xi meeting is going to take place. It's on the anvil, of course. Speaking of Taiwan and the United States of America, for the benefit of our viewers, could you explain the United States' strategic interests in Taiwan, not just as a means or a tool to counter China, but also its deep integrated ties with the US economy?
Well, of course, both China and United States economy are interlinked in many ways in terms of, for example, soybeans, in terms of technology, in terms of investments, and also various areas cooperation on green energy and anti-nuclear nuclearization in North Korea, for example. But as far as Taiwan is concerned, of course, this is a critical issue for Beijing. The United States has already de-recognized Taiwan as a nation, and the United Nations has also not regard Taiwan as any sovereign state, and Taiwan has always belonged to China, and this is a red line as far as Beijing is concerned. But the recent election of a Taiwan leader is throwing a lot of spanner in the works. Because the current leader has a long-established record of separatism. But I don't think that the Trump administration wants Taiwan to create too much of a problem. but neither would it abandon Taiwan because it's a very useful ploy against China's rise. And after all, the supply of arms to Taiwan has long been established under the Taiwan Relations Act. So I don't think that Trump will sort of back away from backing Taiwan in case of any military action against the island. But I don't think that he would allow Taiwan to stir up too much of a problem for him. And I don't think he would cease selling arms to Taiwan because after all, selling not the top-notch armament, but some sort of surplus and is making some money out of that. But at the end of the day, Taiwan remains to be a very useful ploy against the rise of China.
Absolutely. And you've spoken about the sort of domestic politics and the developments as far as the domestic political arena in Taiwan is concerned. We've recently seen Cheng Li-won. She has now been chosen as the chairperson of the KMT. We've seen a congratulatory statement being put out by China as well. A lot of, members of the KMT have been vouching for improving ties with China. They've visited China as well. So in light of this, how do you see the domestic political situation unfolding? And do you think how do you think the United States is viewing these developments?
Well, of course, that the election of this lady as the head of the Kuomintang, which is have a less confrontational stance towards Taiwan, towards Beijing. But on the other hand, I think most of the Taiwanese people, whether they support the current the Democratic Party of Taiwan, the kind of pro-independence party, or the Kuomintang, which advocates a more constructive relationship with Beijing. I think most Taiwanese people do not want unification, but nor do they want independence because they know the consequences will be disastrous. And increasingly a large number of them do not believe that in case war breaks out, the United States will send army or soldiers to Taiwan soil because it's thousands of miles away. So they just want to maintain the status quo, but the status quo cannot allow to be continued forever and ever and ever, because President Xi has already made it quite clear that the absolute deadline is 2049, which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. But on the other hand, 2049 is still a long way off, and then the Taiwan people and the Chinese people on mainland are increasingly interacting with one another positively. Lots of people-to-people exchanges, tourism, investments, and even in production of films, starring Taiwanese actors and Taiwanese directors. So I think that that's what Beijing prefers as a means to, on the one hand, military coercion against any independence movements. Secondly, opening opportunities. And thirdly, promoting people-to-people exchanges to move Taiwan towards a negotiation table for the future of Taiwan under one China.
All right, so with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time sharing your perspectives with us on NewsX World today. Meanwhile, viewers, we're tracking some other major developments. We're now learning that China and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations have signed an upgraded trade agreement. The deal, signed in Kuala Lumpur ahead of the 28th ASEAN-China Summit, expands cooperation into key areas including the digital sector, green economy, and emerging industries as well. The upgraded pact comes as both China and ASEAN are facing new tariff pressures from the United States of America under President Donald Trump's administration. Bilateral trade between China and the 11-member ASEAN bloc reached $771 billion last year, making ASEAN China's largest trading partner. Officials, meanwhile, say that the agreement aims to strengthen regional supply chains and boost market access in sectors such as agriculture, pharmaceuticals, and technology. Meanwhile, Chinese Premier Li Qiang has urged ASEAN nations to stay united. Listen in.
同时，我们也看到当前国际形势出现了不少新的变化，单边主义、 保护主义严重冲击国际经贸秩序，外部势力对本地区的干扰上升，不少国家被无理加征高额关税，我们的发展面临更大的风险和挑战。面对强权政治、经济霸凌、不团结、搞对立，不仅得不到任何好处，还会被外部势力分而治之。
Well, viewers, in the meantime, we're learning that US President Donald Trump met with Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takeichi in Tokyo. This comes just a week after she took office as the country's first female leader. Now, during their meeting, the two leaders have signed a framework agreement that is aimed at securing the supply of critical minerals and rare earths. The agreement also focuses on mining and processing while building diversified and fair markets for these materials through coordinated investment and economic policy tools. During bilateral talks itself, Japan's Prime Minister Takeichi praised US President Trump's commitment to global peace and stability, also stressing that she values Japan's alliance with the US. Listen in to what she stated.
実は安倍総理からはよくトランプ大統領のダイナミックな外交について話を聞いていました。タイとカンボジアの停戦に成功し、トランプ大統領はまずアジアの平和に貢献をされました。それから先般の中東における合意の実現もですね、これはかつてない歴史的偉業です。これだけの短期間に世界はより平和になりました。でこの世界の平和と安定のトランプ大統領の揺るぎないコミットを高く評価します。私自身も強い感銘を受けました。
The Japanese Prime Minister has also expressed her readiness to work closely with Washington to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific. Following her remarks, US President Trump welcomed Japan's increased military capacity and confirmed that Tokyo has placed large orders for US defense equipment. Listen in.
Just signing a new deal, and it's a very fair deal, and we look forward to welcoming Japan into the United States and a continuation. And it's something that everybody is very, very excited about. On behalf of our country, I want to just let you know, anytime you have any question, any doubt, anything you want, any favors you need, anything I can do to help Japan, we will be there. We are an ally at the strongest level.
Meanwhile, Takeichi is expected to present a package of US investments which is worth about $550 billion and covers shipbuilding and increased purchases of soybeans, gas and vehicles from the United States. The agreement now comes amid heightened tensions with Beijing after China tightened export controls on rare earth minerals earlier this month itself. Remember, in a countermeasure, Washington has threatened to impose up to 100% tariffs on Chinese goods. In the meantime, we're also learning that Trump and Takeichi will also visit the US naval base in Yokosuka near Tokyo later in the day. This base is home to the aircraft carrier USS George Washington, which is a key symbol of US military presence in the region. Moreover, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has reportedly arrived in Tokyo ahead of his bilateral meeting with Japanese Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi. The two are expected to discuss regional security, defense cooperation, and joint military exercises aimed at strengthening strategic ties. With us on the broadcast is Dr. Asta Chadda from Ritsumeikan University, joining us from Kyoto. Thank you so much for taking out time and speaking to us on NewsX World. Interesting developments coming in the aftermath of a lot of political rumbles within Japan itself. Now, this meeting between Sanae Takeichi and Donald Trump. I'd first like to discuss the economic angle of what's transpired. We do know that trade tensions between the United States and China have been simmering for quite a while. They're seeming to escalate. At the same time, the US continuing its outreach to Japan. Japan has vowed $550 billion worth of investments inside the United States of America. Where do you see this particular equation heading to next? And how do you think Japan will sort of balance its alliance with the United States of America and ties with China?
Thank you, Pia, for having me. Well, I mean, this was quite anticipated. In fact, if you look at President Trump's whole itinerary for his Japan visit, it seems like it has been well thought out in terms of how the new Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi wishes to project Japan, and her wish is to project it as Japan trying to build a new golden era of this partnership, because that's what she called it. And she called the US-Japan alliance as the greatest alliance in the world. So those were signals even ahead of President Trump's visit that she would be willing to cooperate further to elevate this alliance to newer heights. Now, in terms of the Japanese investment, well, again, this investment should be seen both, as Japanese way of trying to commit to the alliance as part of a larger trade agreement, but also the fact that Japan is seeking some more concessions. In fact, Sanae Takaichi earlier hinted at potentially trying to ask for further relief. This is after Japan had secured a kind of around 15% tariff on exports, which was lower than what was initially threatened, in exchange for large-scale investment. So this is that $550 billion large-scale investment that Japan is pledging. The other aspect of this big investment is the fact that both the leaders have agreed to sign a framework to secure supply chains for critical minerals and rare earths in a way to de-risk, supply chains for these products with regards to China. And then lastly, there have been indications for a while before President Trump arrived that the current Japanese government would consider some more symbolic purchases of the American goods. And this is to address America's or Trump administration's long-standing concerns regarding the trade deficit with Japan. So we are looking at probably buying some pickup trucks or, some products that America makes.
Indeed, and speaking of the defensive relations, this of course comes with larger concerns regarding the Indo-Pacific and the Chinese presence in the Indo-Pacific at large, which is now burgeoning. We have seen that the recent administration in the United States has been focused on the war in the Middle East. It's been focused on the war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine as well. And some experts argue that the Quad has taken a back foot. How do you think now these defense purchases could then help as far as ensuring the United States' ambitions to counter China, Japan's ambitions to counter China and ensure its own security are then taken forward?
Yeah, in terms of security and defense, we knew that when Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi was elected, we knew that she would accelerate military spending in Japan, and that has been in some ways a call by Trump administration as well for Japan to take on more burden of this alliance. So and as well as show Japanese commitment to its role in security, which the US alone does not want to carry. So Prime Minister Takaichi has already pledged that she would raise Japanese defense expenditure to 2% of GDP by next spring. We're also looking at, in their bilateral meeting, definitely two discussions. One, as you mentioned, how to contain any Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific. This is not necessarily to counter China on all fronts, but definitely to find newer avenues to work together. And it is very also likely that probably the Taiwan discussion might come up in the context of how Japan sees Taiwan as very, very close to its territory. As far as Quad is concerned, Quad has 4 members. Apart from Japan and the US, we also need India and Australia on the same page with regards to Trump administration and its foreign policy towards the other 3 partners. So we'll see where the Quad goes from there. But definitely, given that Japan is very committed to this relationship, of course it should be, because this is one of the most important alliances for Japanese security. I see this meeting as very positive, at least for President Trump and his administration.
All right, Dr. Asta Chadha, with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time and sharing your analysis with us on NewsX World. With that, viewers, we're shifting focus towards more news coming in. We're now learning that Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Vadfull has called for fair and reliable trade with China on critical minerals as tensions between Beijing and the European Union rise over export controls. Now, speaking in Brussels, he stated that the EU must diversify suppliers of rare earth minerals and semiconductors, but has stressed that maintaining stable commercial ties with China remains essential. Listen in.
Europa muss erkennen, dass es weiter sich diversifizieren muss, dass es eine Politik der Risikominimierung, also des De-Risking, weiter konsequent verfolgen muss. Und trotzdem parallel setzen wir darauf, dass ein fairer Handel mit China in allen Bereichen, auch in Bereichen der seltenen Erden und auch der Chips weiter möglich ist. Wir sind zu diesem fairen Austausch und zu diesem fairen Handel weiter bereit und glauben, dass wir auch in Peking wieder Partner finden.
Now, these remarks have come after Berlin's decision to postpone a planned diplomatic visit to China after Beijing was unable to confirm meetings beyond a single appointment with the Chinese foreign minister. Meanwhile, Vattel has insisted that the trip would be rescheduled as soon as possible, adding that Germany remains ready for dialogue with one of its most important trading partners. China, meanwhile, this month imposed new restrictions on rare earth exports, which are, of course, key inputs for electric vehicles, consumer electronics, and defense manufacturing equipment. Meanwhile, the German foreign minister has further emphasized that Europe must reduce its strategic vulnerability while preserving balanced trade. Shifting focus to developments that we're tracking from Turkey, we're now learning that a strong earthquake struck western Turkey, shaking several provinces, including areas such as Istanbul, Bursa, Manisa, and Izmir. Now, the 6.1 magnitude quake was centered in the town of Sindirgi in Balıkesir province. This is according to Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Management Agency. The tremor itself occurred late last night at a shallow depth of 6 kilometers and was followed by several aftershocks. Authorities say that at least 3 previously damaged buildings and a 2-story shop collapsed, although no fatal injuries have been reported as of now. 22 people were injured, mainly due to panic-related falls. At the same time, we're also learning that mosques, schools and sporting centers have been opened in order to shelter residents unwilling to return home amid rainfall. With that, viewers, it's a wrap on the China Report. Keep watching NewsX World for more such updates and insights as we slip into a quick short break.